You know that feeling when you check your bank account and there's like $143 sitting there, and you have to mentally calculate whether you can afford to get groceries and gas before your next paycheck hits? That split second of panic where your stomach drops a little bit, and you're doing this weird mental gymnastics of, okay, if I skip lunch twice this week, and maybe I don't really need to fill up the tank all the way. That feeling. I'm willing to bet most of you know exactly what I'm talking about. And here's the weird part. It doesn't even matter if you make $35,000 a year or $85,000 a year. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, that anxiety is the same. You could be a software engineer or a barista, and that pit in your stomach when an unexpected $400 expense pops up, it hits exactly the same way. The number in your account changes, but the feeling doesn't. You're always one bad week away from stress. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, human psychology, and specifically why some people seem to glide through financial challenges while others are constantly white-knuckling their way through every month, refreshing their banking app like it's going to magically show different numbers. And what I've realized, both from my own experience and from watching countless people navigate their financial lives, is that there's this specific threshold where everything changes. Not gradually, not slowly over time, but almost overnight, your entire relationship with money transforms. That number is $5,000. Now, I know that might sound simultaneously too small and impossibly large depending on where you're sitting right now. If you've got $287 in your account, $5,000 seems like climbing Everest. If you've already got $50,000 saved, you're probably thinking, that's it? That's the magic number? But hear me out, because this isn't really about the number itself. It's about what happens in your brain, in your nervous system, in your actual decision-making capacity when you cross that threshold. It's about the invisible shift that occurs when you move from scarcity mode to something completely different. Because here's what nobody tells you about money. The difference between having $0 in savings and having $5,000 in savings isn't just financial. It's neurological. It's psychological. It literally changes how your brain processes risk, makes decisions, and sees the future. And once you understand why this happens, you can't unsee it. More importantly, you can use this knowledge to actually get there, instead of just spinning your wheels wondering why financial advice never seems to stick. The scarcity brain, why you can't think straight when you're broke. Let's start with something that sounds almost too simple to be true, but it's backed by actual neuroscience. When you don't have any money saved, your brain literally functions differently. Not metaphorically, not in some vague emotional sense. Actually, physically, measurably differently. There's this fascinating study that came out of Princeton where researchers found that financial scarcity reduces cognitive capacity by about 13 IQ points. 13 points. That's the difference between average intelligence and borderline intellectually impaired, just from worrying about money. Think about that for a second. The stress of not having enough literally makes you dumber. But it's not just about intelligence, it's about bandwidth. When you're operating in scarcity mode, your brain is constantly running background calculations. Can I afford this? What if my car breaks down? How am I going to make rent? It's like having 17 browser tabs open at all times, except the tabs are all anxiety and math. You're using mental energy just to stay afloat, which means you have less energy for everything else. Planning ahead, learning new skills, making good decisions, being creative, honestly, just being present in your own life. I remember this period about 6 years ago when I had maybe $600 to my name, and I was working a job I hated because I couldn't afford to quit. And I'd go to the grocery store and stand in the aisle for like 10 minutes trying to decide between the $3.49 pasta sauce and the $2.99 pasta sauce. 10 minutes. For 50 cents. And the wild thing is, it wasn't even about the 50 cents. It was about the fact that every single decision felt like it had enormous consequences because there was no buffer, no margin for error. One wrong choice and the whole house of cards could collapse. That's scarcity brain. That's what it feels like to operate without any cushion. Every decision becomes a high-stakes gamble because you have no room to absorb mistakes. The first breath of financial oxygen. So what happens when you hit $5,000? Why is this number specifically where things shift? Well, first of all, let's be clear about what $5,000 actually represents. For most people, it's roughly 1 to 2 months of bare minimum living expenses. Not comfortable living, not treating yourself, just the basics: rent, food, utilities, transportation. The absolute floor of existence. And that might not sound like much, but psychologically, it's everything. Because once you have that cushion, you're no longer operating in pure survival mode. You're not making decisions from a place of immediate desperation. You have, for the first time maybe in your entire adult life, the ability to think one move ahead instead of just reacting to whatever crisis is currently on fire. I talked to my friend Maya about this recently. She'd been living paycheck to paycheck for years, working 2 jobs, the whole thing. And she told me that the moment she hit $5,000 in her savings account, she slept through the night for the first time in months. Just slept. No waking up at 3 a.m. doing math in her head, no anxiety dreams about bills. Her body finally felt safe enough to rest. And that's the thing, right? Financial security isn't just a spreadsheet thing. It's a nervous system thing. Your body keeps score. When you're constantly in financial fight or flight mode, your cortisol is elevated, your sleep suffers, your immune system takes a hit. You're living in a state of chronic stress that affects everything from your digestion to your relationships to your ability to concentrate at work. The moment you have that buffer, your body exhales. Finally. The decision-making revolution. But here's where it gets really interesting. Once you have $5,000 saved, you don't just feel different. You actually start making fundamentally different decisions. Better decisions. Smarter decisions. Not because you suddenly became more disciplined or responsible, but because you literally have the mental space to think clearly. Let me give you a concrete example. Say your car makes a weird noise. When you have zero savings, you ignore it. You pray it goes away. You turn up the radio. Because taking it to a mechanic means spending money you don't have, which means going into debt, which means more stress. So you wait until the car literally dies on the highway. And now instead of a $200 fix, you're looking at $2,000 in repairs, or worse, having to buy a new car with money you absolutely don't have. But when you have $5,000 saved, you take it to the mechanic. You catch the problem early. You spend $200 instead of $2,000. That's not being more financially savvy or responsible. That's just being able to make the obvious rational choice because you're not paralyzed by fear. This ripples out into every area of your life. You can negotiate better at work because you're not terrified of losing your job. You can leave a toxic relationship because you know you can cover your own rent for a couple months. You can invest in your education or skills because you're not funneling every dollar into immediate survival. You can actually say no to things that don't serve you. There's this concept in economics called the poor pay more, and it's brutally true. When you don't have savings, you pay overdraft fees. You pay late fees. You use predatory payday loans. You can't buy in bulk even though it's cheaper. You can't afford preventive health care, so you end up in the emergency room. Being broke is expensive. Having $5,000 in the bank means you can finally stop paying the poverty tax. The identity shift nobody talks about. Here's something that surprised me when I first crossed this threshold myself. It changed how I saw myself. Not in some superficial, I'm successful now way, but in a deep foundational way. I went from thinking of myself as someone who was bad with money to someone who was capable. Someone who could plan ahead. Someone who could handle things. And that identity shift matters more than you might think. Because the story you tell yourself about who you are with money determines what you do with money. If you see yourself as someone who's just not good at saving or always broke or bad with finances, then every action you take will reinforce that story. You'll self-sabotage. You'll give up when it gets hard. You'll tell yourself it's just not in your nature. But the moment you hit that $5,000 mark and you realize, holy shit, I actually did this, something cracks open. You start thinking, okay, if I could do this, what else is possible? It's not about the money itself. It's about proving to yourself that you're capable of doing something that felt impossible. That you can delay gratification. That you can make a plan and stick to it. That you're the kind of person who has their act together. I've watched this happen with so many people. They hit that first real savings milestone and suddenly they're interested in learning about investing. They're thinking about their retirement. They're making 5-year plans. Not because someone told them they should, but because they finally believe they're the kind of person who has a future worth planning for. The emotional regulation jackpot. Let's talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention: how money affects your emotional state on a day-to-day basis. Because when you're broke, you're not just stressed about money, you're stressed about everything, and money is just the lens through which all stress gets magnified. Your kid needs school supplies. Your friend's getting married and you're invited to the wedding. Your work pants rip and you need new ones. None of these are catastrophes, but when you have no savings, each one feels like a personal crisis. Each one triggers that fight-or-flight response. Each one sends you into a shame spiral about why you can't just have your life together like everyone else seems to. But with $5,000 in the bank, these things are just things. Minor inconveniences, problems you can solve. You buy the school supplies, you get a wedding gift, you buy new pants. And yeah, it might dent your savings a little bit, but you're not spiraling. You're not losing sleep. You're not snapping at your partner because you're so stressed you can barely function. This emotional regulation is huge, like genuinely life-changing huge. Because when you're not constantly in emotional crisis mode, you can actually be present for your life. You can enjoy things. You can be patient with your kids. You can take on challenges at work. You can be a better friend, a better partner, a better version of yourself. There's this study from the Journal of Consumer Psychology that found that financial security is one of the strongest predictors of overall life satisfaction, even more than income level. It's not about having a lot of money, it's about having enough money that you feel stable, secure, like you can handle whatever comes your way. And $5,000 is where most people start to feel that shift. The compound effect of small stability. Here's where the magic really starts happening. And this is something that takes most people by surprise. Once you have $5,000 saved, it becomes exponentially easier to save more. Not linearly easier, exponentially easier. Why? Because you're no longer constantly depleting your savings for every little emergency. That $5,000 buffer means that when your car needs a $300 repair, you pay for it and move on. You don't have to drain your account to zero, rebuild from nothing, get hit with another emergency, drain it again. That cycle of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back finally breaks. Plus, and this is where it gets really interesting, you start making money moves that were completely inaccessible before. You can actually shop around for better insurance rates instead of just auto-renewing whatever you have. You can switch to a bank that doesn't charge monthly fees. You can buy that $200 pair of work shoes that'll last 5 years instead of the $40 pair that'll last 6 months. You can take advantage of sales and bulk pricing. You have access to the financial system in a way that you just don't when you're broke. It's like in video games where you need certain items or abilities to access new areas. Having $5,000 saved unlocks a whole level of financial options that were literally not available to you before. And each of those options makes it easier to save more, which opens up more options, which makes it easier to save more. The cycle starts working for you instead of against you. I know this guy Daniel who hit $5,000 in savings and used it as leverage to quit his job and take a better position at another company. He couldn't have done that without the cushion because the new job had a 2-week gap in pay periods. That job paid $15,000 more per year. So his $5,000 buffer directly led to a significant income increase, which made saving even easier. That's the compound effect in action. The practical path, how to actually get there. Okay, so we've established why $5,000 matters, but how do you actually get there when you're starting from zero or close to it? Because this is where most advice becomes completely useless, right? Just save 20% of your income. Cool, thanks. That's super helpful when I'm living on 110% of my income already. Here's the thing. Getting to $5,000 requires a completely different strategy than maintaining $5,000. You can't use the same playbook. You need to think about this in terms of psychological wins and momentum, not just math. First, you need to start with something absurdly small, like embarrassingly small. $5 a week, $10 a week. Whatever amount you can save without feeling any pinch whatsoever. Because the goal right now isn't to save a lot. The goal is to prove to yourself that you can save at all. To build the identity of someone who saves. Every time you transfer that $5, you're reinforcing the narrative that you're a person who saves money. That matters more than the amount. Second, you need to automate it. Do not rely on willpower. Willpower is a finite resource that gets depleted throughout the day, which is why you always make terrible financial decisions at 9 p.m. when you're tired and stressed. Set up an automatic transfer the day after your paycheck hits. Make it invisible. Make it so you never have to make the decision. Third, and this is crucial, you need to protect that money like it's sacred. Do not touch it unless it's a genuine emergency. And no, a sale on shoes is not an emergency. Neither is your friend's birthday. Neither is being too tired to cook. A genuine emergency is, my car died and I need it to get to work. Or, I have a medical crisis. Or, I'm about to be evicted. That's it. Everything else you figure out with your regular income. The hardest part is the beginning. Getting from $0 to $1,000 feels impossible. It feels like you're making no progress. You're saving $20 a week and it's like, cool, at this rate I'll hit my goal in approximately 5 years. But here's what happens. Once you hit around $1,000, something psychological shifts. You start to believe it's possible. You get excited. You start looking for extra money to throw at it. You pick up a side gig, you sell stuff you don't need, you find ways to cut expenses that didn't feel possible before. And then, weirdly, the jump from $1,000 to $5,000 often happens faster than the jump from $0 to $1,000. Because momentum is real. Because you've built the habits. Because you've changed your identity. Because your brain has started to rewire itself around this new reality of being someone who saves money. Look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that $5,000 in savings will solve all your problems. It won't make you rich. It won't eliminate financial stress entirely. It won't transform you into some perfectly disciplined financial guru who never makes mistakes. That's not what this is about. But what it will do, what it genuinely, measurably, scientifically will do, is change your brain. It'll shift you out of survival mode and into a place where you can actually think clearly, make better decisions, and start building something sustainable. It'll give your nervous system permission to relax. It'll prove to yourself that you're capable of more than you thought. It'll break the cycle of crisis-to-crisis living that keeps so many people stuck. The thing about financial stability is that it's not really about the money itself. Money is just a tool. What you're really building is agency, control over your own life. The ability to make choices based on what's best for you, not just what's immediately necessary. The freedom to say no to things that don't serve you and yes to things that do. That's what $5,000 buys you. That's why it matters. And here's what I want you to understand. If you're sitting there right now thinking, this all sounds great, but I'm so far from $5,000 it feels pointless to even try. I get it. I've been there. Most people have been there. But the distance between where you are now and where you want to be doesn't matter as much as the direction you're moving. Every single person who has $5,000 in savings started with $0. Every single one of them had a moment where it felt impossible. And every single one of them got there by making small, consistent choices that added up over time. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to make huge, dramatic changes to your entire life. You just have to start. $5, $10, whatever you can do right now, today, this week. And then do it again next week, and the week after that. Because here's the truth that nobody wants to tell you. The hard part isn't the saving. The hard part is believing you deserve to have savings. Believing you're the kind of person who can do this. Believing that your future self is worth investing in right now. Once you cross that mental threshold, the money part becomes almost secondary. So start small, start messy, start imperfect, but start. Your brain will thank you. Your nervous system will thank you. Your future self will thank you. And 6 months from now, a year from now, when you look at that balance and see $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, you won't just feel proud of the number. You'll feel different about who you are. And that, honestly, is worth more than the money itself. You've got this. I guarantee you've got this.